An off-duty pilot tried to disrupt Alaska Airlines flight engines before being subdued, says an airline. Breaking news, Alaska Flight 2059 diverted to Portland after pilot sitting in the jump seat tried to shut down both of the engines. Off-duty pilot tries to take control of Alaska Airlines flight to San Francisco before being subdued, authorities say. What? So if you watch the news over the last couple days, you'll have probably noticed where it says an Alaska Airlines off-duty pilot sitting in a jump seat tried to hijack a flight that was taken off from Payne to Northern California, I believe. Yeah, this does hit pretty close to home because not only do I live in the Pacific Northwest, and I also worked for Horizon for a period of time. Great bunch of people, great crews, great training. I enjoyed my time there. So, and I do have family in Alaska Airlines. I have a bunch of friends that I work for Alaska Airlines and Horizon. So the fact that this happened in my neck of the woods with my people is unsettling, to say the least. So we're going to start off with an Alaska Airlines memo that I came across that just kind of covers the facts and was sent out to all the employees. At the end of it, it does say the usual things like don't talk about it, don't go out and spreading rumors. I'm no longer an employee of Alaska Airlines or Horizon, and so I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. So what it says early October 22nd, Alaska Airlines Flight 2059, operated by Horizon Air out of Everett, Washington to San Francisco, California, reported a credible threat to an authorized occupant in the flight deck jump seat. No weapons were involved and the crew was able to secure the threat without incident. Following the appropriate FAA procedures and guidance from air traffic control, the flight safely diverted to Portland, Oregon. The incident is being investigated by law enforcement authorities. All passengers were reaccommodated to their destinations on a new aircraft with a new crew. Other news outlets state that after the plane reached its cruising altitude, that the jump seater reportedly tried to reach up and pull the fire handles, which would effectively shut off the engines if not addressed immediately. So it says that the crew subdued the threat. Who knows what that means? But it says that they put him in the back. I'll go ahead and put a link down in the description below. You can hear the communication between the air traffic control and the pilot. And where it comes in on the video is they're obviously after they've subdued the occupant and put him in the back of the plane. And then they're just beginning their descent, going down into Portland, so obviously cutting their flight short. So a lot of initial reports reported this as a hijacking attempt. Hijack? Really? By a pilot? I mean, I always try and give people the benefit of the doubt. And yes, this is a very unfortunate situation that everybody was put into. My heart does go out to the pilot, the jump seater, because obviously something was not right with him. I do got to give a lot of props to the pilots over at Horizon. Being one of the formerly trained Horizon pilots, I do know that they have an excellent training record, and so I'm sure that they handled this situation with professionalism. And I mean, you can hear the voice recorder of the guy just like cool as a cucumber, coming in, no problem. But it's the fact that they're calling this a hijacking. They arrested him on 83 counts of attempted murder, 83 counts of assault or endangerment, I think. And also, trying to take over an airplane. That's a big no-no. But there are some things that just seem fishy about this. We'll save that towards the end of the video. But for now, let's go ahead and talk about why he was in the jump seat in the first place. So the jump seat, what is it? It's the extra seat that's in the flight deck. There's usually one or two very uncomfortable seats that are primarily reserved for basically just having an extra seat in the flight deck. It could be anyone who is commuting, which in this case, I think that they stated this person was commuting. I believe he was based down in San Francisco. So the fact that he was up in Seattle could have been for a trip, could be going home, who knows what. So people are typically going from point A to point B, whether it be work or business or pleasure. It's completely up to them. The other people that could occupy this seat are official deadheading crew members. Could be FAA, could be NTSB, people who are operating in an official capacity. Maybe they're observing the flight deck. Could be a company evaluator or a check airman. Somebody who's recently come out of training, or periodically we do have to have somebody come and, look over our shoulder to make sure that we're doing everything, following procedures and doing everything safely in company and FAA compliance. So somebody sitting in this seat is not unusual. It's very common. To get in this seat, though, is not just up for any passengers. It's not even up for any airline employee, not even up for flight employees like flight attendants. This is specifically reserved for people who are authorized to access the flight deck in flight. As you can imagine, this list is going to be pretty small. So the initial reports indicate that this off-duty pilot tried to shut off the engines by pulling the fire handles. Now the fire handles are on the overhead panel for most flight decks, and they are in easy reach from both pilot and co-pilot in case that there is a fire to the engines. And so to recap on how a fire works, you have your fuel, you have your ignition source, you have air. You need those three things in order to sustain a fire. So pulling the fire handle is effectively going to try and cut off one or all three of those elements. So first off, what are you going to do when you pull a fire handle? Now again, I can't speak to what the Embraer 175 has. Most fire handles will do this the same thing. Basically, for the 747, I'm going to go ahead and explain what this one is. So it's going to cut off the fuel. It cuts off the fuel to the engine in multiple places to try and starve the fire of fuel. It's going to trip the generator, so it's going to cut off electricity to and from the engines, which would hopefully, theoretically cut off the ignition source if we were to have a fire going. And it's also going to shut off the air going from the engine. Of course, it is outside, so depending on where the fire is, air is going to get to it. At altitude, it's not going to have a lot of air, but it's still going to have air. And also, we want to shut off the air coming from the engine because the air coming off the engine goes into various systems in the aircraft, one of being the ventilation for the cabin. So we don't want to be breathing in, jet fuel, fire smoke, and just having a bad day that way. So basically, that does those things. The final thing that it does is that it arms the fire extinguisher bottles, and it doesn't deploy the fire extinguishing unit because it does give you the opportunity to wait and see if the fire goes out. Because once you blow those bottles, there's only a certain amount of bottles or fire extinguisher bottles on board the airplane that are dedicated to the engines. So once you deploy those, you want to make sure that the fire goes out. You're not going to have too many opportunities to try again. So let's talk about threat levels, defense, and security of the flight deck. If you watch the video below, you'll hear the air traffic control and the flight talking about the threat levels, or what the highest threat level is eventually. And what they're referring to is Advisory Circular 90-103, which was put out by the FAA, and it lists the 4 distinct levels of threats that we have in the aircraft. Threat level 1 is, the definition is disruptive behavior, suspicious or threatening. Level 2, it talks about physical abusive behavior. So let's say you take that person who's belligerent, doesn't want to wear a mask, doesn't want to switch seats, whatever it is, and they start to get physical with either other passengers or the flight crew. But threat level 2 is somebody who is crossed the physical barrier and gotten to be physically abusive. Number 3 is life-threatening behavior. So at this point, they could be somebody that's maybe using a weapon, chokehold, whatever, throwing punches, or whatever it is that they have now escalated to just pushing and shoving, and they're straight up fighting. Now, threat level 4. In this case, the pilot did say that they did escalate to a threat level 4. You'll see why. The definition is attempted or actual breach of the flight deck. This case is very unique because he was already in the flight deck and then he became a threat. So yeah, I guess I would also have classified this as a number 4 threat because he did breach the flight deck and he was able to reach the controls, and that's and then after that happened, it says that they subdued him, they put him in the back of the plane, and after that he calmed down. So that's what they mean by the threat levels. So let's talk about the results of this. It says, well, I guess some information is a little bit old now, but they was booked the jump seater after they got off the plane in Portland. They were immediately arrested and booked into jail, where they were charged with 83 counts of attempted murder, endangering an aircraft, and 83 counts of endangerment. Not a great day. Some of the news articles that have come out since then says that he was on psychedelic mushrooms, or he talked about it. He was also on 40 hours of being awake, which that is an issue. I haven't done mushrooms, but I have definitely been awake for for about 40 hours. Today specifically, I woke up around noon local. I'm in Anchorage here. Our departure is at 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. local, and we're flying over to JFK. That's however many hours. We're landing there 6 a.m. local time. And it's also my go home day, so they bought my ticket to go home from JFK, which takes off at 7:30, and I think I land at 10:45 local in Washington. So 10:45, I'll probably pick up my truck, drive home, and get home around noon, but then it's also noon, so I'm probably just going to stay up for a while, and maybe I'll get to bed around, 9, 10 o'clock or whatever after the kids go to bed. So do the math. Here's the grand total answer for that. Long time. Yeah, I might get a couple naps here and there on the flight or on the flight home, or at home, but chances are I'm going to be awake for quite a while. And so the FAA does limit the amount of working hours and flight hours that you are able to do throughout the day, depending on your crew, depending on your length of duty time, depending on how many legs that you have. So it is heavily monitored, it is carefully regulated, but that doesn't mean we don't get tired. Just because we come out of a rest period doesn't mean that we're exactly completely rested. So I mentioned that some of the things seemed fishy about this hijacking claim. So one of the first things that these reports said that no weapons were used. Now, I'm not saying you need a weapon, but if you're going to take control of an airplane, it would be a whole lot easier if you had one. If he really wanted to shut down the engines, he absolutely could have. There's more than one way of just pulling the fire handles that could shut down an engine, and not only just shut them down, but shut them down to a point where they wouldn't be able to relight them in time to safely land the aircraft. Number 3, if he was trying to crash a plane, being a pilot, you know that if the engines fail at cruise altitude, you are 100 times more likely to get the airplane down safely as if you were to fail the airplane on, say, takeoff. I mean, that scenario specifically, we call them V1 cuts, that is the worst place for an aircraft to lose an engine is on the takeoff roll, because you're at a low altitude, you're at low airspeed, you're the heaviest that you will be, because when you land, you're going to burn fuel. So being heavier means that you're not going to climb as quickly. So if you were to fail an engine at these low altitudes, that's exactly why we practice it, because it's kind of a worst case scenario feature. So this guy, if he wanted to fail the engines and crash a plane, why did he do it at a high altitude versus a low altitude? 4, if you wanted to, again, I feel kind of awkward saying worst case scenario and how to effectively crash a plane, but if you wanted to do the most damage, why would you pick a regional flight? I mean, not saying that wouldn't be bad, but that was 83 people. There are aircraft that house way more people than that. Namely, the one that he flies. He's an Alaska Airlines pilot, which means he's probably flying a 737, or he's flying an Airbus out of California, and they hold, I forget the number, 175 people. So easily he could have doubled his amount of affected people. Wow, that sounds pretty morbid, but you get what I'm saying. Also, he's a pilot. Why is he taking a Horizon flight? He could easily be taking his own. So some things just don't make sense to me. And yeah, it's the fact that some of the reports that came out said that he was lack of sleep, he was depressed, he was probably not in a correct state of mind. Things like this, I can kind of sympathize with a little bit more, because now I'm a little bit more understanding. It's just the whole hijacking, people throwing around titles right off the bat. It didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense. So honestly, what I think this was probably, maybe it was a cry for help. You hear people doing things like that. The big stigma with the FAA is that if you were to admit that you have any kind of mental illness, or like I said, whether it be depression, bipolar, anxiety, or it could be any number of things, that they will instantly pull your medical certificate. Yes, it is possible to get an exemption that says that you're treating it, or you're seeing somebody, you're taking medication, whatever, but you still have to go through a lot of hoops in order to get that reinstated. A lot of hoops that a lot of pilots are hesitant to jump through because it's our livelihood. You know, if we don't have that piece of paper that says we're medically healthy to fly, we don't fly. If we don't fly, we don't eat. Having said that, that is a little, it's unfortunate because, yes, I know a lot of people struggle with depression, with bipolar, with anxiety, or any number of mental health issues. But because of people are afraid to do that, there are not loopholes, but there are ways to still talk to somebody if you need somebody to get help. Like therapists, counselors, since they're not necessarily always pastors, even since they're not necessarily always operate on a official capacity. You know, you say, oh, I'm having a tough time, marriage counseling, whatever, having a tough time with my parents, having a tough time at work. And if you're just stressed and you need to talk to somebody, that is okay. Do that. Do that all you want. If you get to the point where you're talking to like a psychiatrist and they diagnose you officially with some type of issue, that is where the FAA might likely get involved, especially if you don't disclose that and that comes up later, you're going to be in big trouble. Now, like I said before, we do have our different levels of medical certificates. One of the things that it says that they check for is mental health. Other things that they check for is, you know, things like vision, peeing a cup, you're going to check your blood pressure, your height, your weight, making sure you're generally healthy. You know, your vision has to be so-so or has to be corrected to a certain point. Blood pressure, I have high blood pressure, but I manage it with medication, which I do have to get an extra piece of paperwork signed when I get my aviation medical, but it's really not that big of a deal. Now, if you were to have a mental disorder or a mental illness, and that caused you to not get your aviation medical certificate, or you have to jump through more hoops, I don't know what that process would be like, but I imagine it's probably not very fun. The issue there is, yes, it does say that the FAA will issue your certificate if you jump through these hoops, but it is also possible that maybe you have a first-class medical and they get taken away and you get it reissued, but it's reissued as a second-class medical certificate. Yes, you still have a pilot license. Yes, you can still operate in a commercial capacity, but let's say if you were an airline pilot for Alaska Airlines, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. You've effectively lost your job. And so that is why there's the unfortunate realization that people don't go ahead and talk to counselors and talk to therapists. But I do implore you, if you feel the need, please do so. For final words here, for the pilots that operated the flight 2059 out of Payne, good job. I mean, proud of you guys. I'm proud to say that I'm a former Horizon pilot flying out of the Northwest. So I do know that they had some fantastic training from the individuals over there. For the 5 things that every pilot needs to do to be safe and to maintain their legality and their good faith with the company and the FAA, there are 5 things that you need to worry about. Your certificate, your crew, your passengers, the plane, and the brand. You keep care of all 5 of those things, you're going to be a great pilot. So I do apologize if this was a little bit heavier video than the previous ones I posted, but it was relevant, it was close to my heart, and like I said, one of the big takeaways here is mental health and taking care of yourself. If you're a pilot, it's hard for me to explain, but you know the struggles that we can go through for, you know, stress and you know, whether it be stress at home, stress at work, and the fear of disclosing that to the FAA. But you can still go ahead and talk to, you know, like I said, you can talk to a pastor, counselor, therapist. These are people that are just there to talk. Once you get to a psychiatrist, though, check with your union and see if they have any that specifically approve that. Until then, that's it for this video. If you like what you see, be sure to like, comment, subscribe. If you want to see anything in the future videos, please feel free to leave that in the comment section down below. We will be following this story as it progresses, so I will be revisiting this sometime in the near future. Until then, thanks for flying. My name is Ryan.